Hey friend, I am so excited about this video. I will be reviewing the Color It watercolor brush pens. I will be answering some specific questions that I got on Instagram, like explaining the difference between a watercolor brush pen and a regular brush pen, how well do they blend, are they worth the price, and lots of other questions. I am so grateful for your comments on YouTube or Instagram because I honestly would not have thought to test certain things that I'm going to show you here. So thank you so much for being here, for your comments, for participating with me. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and let's jump right in. So Color It is a coloring book company. They sell coloring supplies and coloring books. They sent me one of their watercolor pads and their watercolor brush pen set. I love the cover on these and the cute little box. And I especially love this case. It's definitely my favorite part. I also love the names of these colors. They're all labeled, so that makes me happy. It comes with 24 different colors. These are currently all of the colors that they have, but looking at the other coloring supplies, I wouldn't be surprised if they have more later. But I am very happy about the color selection. There are some naturals, brights, and pastels. I know a lot of people like pastel, but I personally rarely use them because I prefer bright colors. But I do like the pastels here for blending. I also like that the lid is clear. The color of the marker matches the ink pretty well, so it's easy to see which color I'm grabbing. The only color that I feel like is not the right name for the color is the sharp indigo. It seems a little more of a periwinkle, but that is not a big deal, it's just the name. I am very excited about the Faithful Fuchsia. It's the perfect pink for me. A lot of markers don't come in the right pinks, for me at least, so I'm really happy about that. You can kind of see these have actual bristles like a paintbrush, not a felt tip brush pen, and I'll show you more on that later. So Color It sells a lot of awesome coloring books. I read on their website they don't recommend to use these watercolor brush pens on their coloring books because they're not watercolor paper. I'm assuming you could if you're not doing any blending, but if you want to do any blending, you'll probably want watercolor paper. So this small style is my favorite. It does take some control. I've been doing it for a while, and so I have the muscle memory, but it does take some practice. The second style is me pressing down all the way, and you can see it has that brush stroke look because they are bristles, like I said. And this notebook that I'm writing in, it has very thin paper, so the pens are not going to blend much at all on this. The paper is too thin. I was surprised that it didn't bleed through that much to the other side, so if you're not putting that much ink down, it's not going to bleed a ton. But the spots where I did try to blend it, it does show through. The tips are soft like an actual brush, so there are a lot of different things that you can do, a lot of different ways you can letter. It does take a lot more control and practice. So as you see, it's probably best to use these on a little bit thicker paper, something like watercolor paper. With the basic strokes, you can see there is so much ink that wants to come out. You can use these like any other brush pen, but it does take more control. This is my real-time speed, and it's really slow because I am controlling the bristles very carefully. I would say if you are brand new to lettering, these have a huge learning curve. However, if you want to learn watercolor lettering, these are a great gateway to learn because they are a lot easier than a paintbrush. I will show you some blending tricks you can use that make these a great option for watercolor regardless of whether or not you'll be lettering with them. But now I want to show you how they are different from regular brush pens. So the brush pen I'm using is the Kuretake Fudabayori. You can hear it's squeaky. It has the felt tip, and so you can control the thick and thin pretty well. The watercolor brush pen doesn't have much sound. and it does take a lot more control. The Fudobayori is a felt tip, and the watercolor brush pen has bristles, and you can get that brush stroke look because it's almost like a paintbrush. Now, I will also show you the Ecoline brush pen, the Winsor & Newton watercolor marker, and the Tombow dual brush pen, because these are all water-based, so they will blend really well, but they are very, very different. They're really, you can't compare them because the watercolor brush pen is so different. So when I say watercolor brush pen, it sounds like it's just a brush pen with watercolor, but it's actually like a paintbrush with bristles that has the watercolor already loaded into the pen. So you can see with the Ecoline right here, that's a felt tip that's bending, not bristles. It is watercolor ink that comes out, so it's super juicy, but it is the felt tip, which is easier to get a consistent, precise stroke. Same with the Winsor & Newton watercolor marker, as well as the Tombow. Like I said, they are all water-based, which makes it really easy to blend, but the Colorit pens will not fray because they are bristles, so you don't have to worry about using watercolor paper. That's kind of the paradox of these other watercolor markers that I have. I always want to use them on watercolor paper, but I know how easily they fray, especially Tombow. So that's definitely a bonus of having Colorit watercolor brush pens. So now I'll show you the difference between several different watercolor brush pens. If you search on Amazon watercolor brush pen, you will see tons of these in all different brands. And I have only tried a few, which is what I'm going to show you here. They are all very different sizes and flexibilities. Colorit is the only one that is refillable. So you buy the little ink refill and then you just open up the bottom of your pen and you pour in the ink. My favorite flexibility of these three is the Colorit because it is the most similar to the Pentel Fine water brush, which I have here. So you can check out this other video on why I love that water brush. But basically it's how well the bristles push back when you apply pressure, and the Colorit pushes back more than the others, which I really like. The ink also comes out a lot more consistently with very little effort. You can see here with the Kuretake Zig Clean color, there's that slight stroke look, and then the same with the Life of Color. I would just have to go a lot slower to get the same effect. As for price, the Life of Color is the least expensive. Zig Clean Color is the most expensive. I like all of them and I am glad that I have all of them, but the bristles of Colorit are my favorite. Life of Color is a bit softer, so it depends on if you like that. And Zig Clean Color has the most color options and you can buy them individually, but they are the most expensive. But of course, none can quite match the Pentel water brush, which is my absolute favorite, but Colorit is definitely the closest. And it's much more portable and easy to travel with than the Pentel and some other watercolor. I've had all of them for several months and I haven't had any ink run out. If it ever does, I'll add that to the description box below. It is nice to know that Colorit has refills just in case. So now I'm starting to show you some blending. This is just the watercolor brush pens, no water at all, and the Colorit watercolor paper. I'm really pleased with how the ink flows nicely out of the bristles. These would be so fun to do a coloring page with. These watercolor brush pens are dye-based, which means they are probably not light fast, so it could potentially fade. So that's just something to know for the future. Most regular brush pens and liquid watercolor are dye-based. So then next I'm using mixed media paper just to see the difference, and it blended well with just a little bit of blending. Here I am blending in between my letters a little bit more than I did the first time, and it is working really well now that it's on mixed media paper instead of the little thin paper notebook that I was using earlier. I really like how easily they blend without even adding any water. I can blend them just with the markers, which makes them great for traveling. And now again, I'm using the watercolor paper from Color It, and I wanted to try something different, adding the colors and then adding the water, and this turned out great. This was a lot of water and I didn't have any issues with it. And like I already mentioned earlier, I really like these color options that I have. I did add a little bit more color in the end and it still worked great. So you can see these colors are very vibrant. You can get a lot of color out of it. So then I wanted to blend in a little bit of a different way with a word and then using a gradient. And you can see it is kind of blending. It wasn't as good as I was expecting. This is the watercolor paper from Color It, and it started to feather out and spread. So I didn't know if it was just that one paper I was using or the technique I was using, so I decided to try it again with a little bit different colors. And you can see here that it still did the same thing and it didn't blend perfectly, making that perfect gradient. You can still kind of see the line between each color. And so because of that, I decided to investigate what was happening. Why did it feather out like that? I did add some gold watercolor around the edges so that this fun rainbow piece would look like it's finished instead of having that feathered out edge look, because that is just not fun and it's nothing you can do to control it. It's just the paper. That's something that might happen with mixed media paper if you're using too much water. However, I thought that this paper was the same as my Ensign XL watercolor paper. So here you can see them together. It looks like they're exactly the same. They both say they are 140 pound, 300 GM. The Color It watercolor paper does say it's for mixed media, which makes me think maybe it's not meant to have that much water on it. But at the same time, it does say that it is professional watercolor paper. It's cold press, just like the Ensign. So I'm not really sure why it did that. But I decided to try it on the Ensign just to see if it did the same thing, if maybe it's just that weight of paper. But what I found is on the Ensign, it did blend so much easier. You can see here that I'm not having any line at all. You can't tell where I put down the ink in between each color. So it must just be something about the texture of the Color It watercolor paper. So if you're going to buy that, I would recommend just using it like mixed media paper, not using it with a lot of water. Because as you saw earlier, I honestly didn't have any problems with it until I started adding more water. The Ensign watercolor paper, I get mine at Walmart for like $5, so it's a better price anyways. And then I let that dry overnight and I went back to it to reactivate the watercolors just to see how well they would do. And I was so impressed and so surprised because the colors were still super vibrant when I put water on it, and I could pull down that pink so far. You can definitely reactivate this watercolor super easy. One of the questions I got was whether or not you could do a wet on wet technique. So I decided to try it and I am really excited to tell you that you can. I love how this turned out. On the left, I wet my paper and then I just brushed my watercolor brush marker through the water, and it kind of did like take out the ink a little bit, and then I had to work at it on the right side to get the ink to flow again. On the right side, I am just blending these watercolor markers with each other, no water involved. So both ways worked great, just different techniques. And the last question I got is whether or not it would blur out fine liners. This one, it depends on your fine liner. My crayons are alcohol based, and so they do not blend with water. And we finally made it to my last word I am blending. I decided to blend another word like I did before, but on my Canson watercolor paper, and it did turn out a lot better. You can see I'm getting perfect ombre gradient blends. To conclude this, I would highly recommend these if you want to get into watercolor lettering or if you just do watercolor. So I hope this answered all of your questions about them. I will link them below. Thank you again for watching. I appreciate you being here. There will be a giveaway going on my Instagram page just for the next couple of days, so check that out. I'll see you next time.